Let's zero in on the two big fish in the Broncos receiving room in particular. Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton. Those are kind of the two names. KJ Hamler's been thrown out there as well, but what are you going to get for a guy like KJ, who's a little bit of a smaller guy, has dealt with some injury history over the course of his career? Courtland and Jerry seem to be two players that if Denver wanted to accrue some draft picks, whether that's a first-round pick, which is what they want, or maybe a couple of seconds, some thirds, whatever it might be, those are the guys that you'd be able to facilitate a trade for. So the question I have for you is, you mentioned that you don't think the Broncos were serious in trading away Jerry Jeudy.
No.
Curious to get your opinion on Courtland Sutton. Are you comfortable with the state of the Denver Broncos wide receiver room? Do you think that they have enough, considering the Broncos, were last in points per game last year, averaging 16.9 points?
I sleep comfortably at night with that. However, adding another guy to the mix wouldn't be a bad option for you, right? It simply wouldn't. Look who's out there right now, Odell, right? And there were reports that he wanted $20 million. He's like, where did that come from? He's like, I never said it. He said, I just said I don't want $4 million a year. I want, he wants decent value. In my opinion, I think the Broncos are in a position right now. Look, KJ Hamler, he's not even, I don't even think he's making $1 million. I think he's like $900-something thousand on his contract, essentially this year. I have to double check that. He's not accounting for much. Tim Patrick, you extended him at a pretty good value what the wide receiver market is, coming off of an ACL. Courtland, coming off of, a year where it wasn't his best season, but it's also the entire offense was dysfunctional. I mean, heck, the offense couldn't even feature Jerry Jeudy in the offense toward the end of the season because they didn't have a game plan. In my opinion, the Broncos wide receiver room, I think, is okay this year. I think it's okay to go with who you have, and maybe you do add one guy, right? Maybe you add in another veteran option. It's possible, right? And I think a lot of people are looking at, okay, well, they were interested in Allen Lazard. They would have had to pay a lot of money for Allen Lazard. Right. They were also interested in Adam Thielen, as you mentioned there. The Broncos were in discussions, which makes sense considering George Payton's former ties to the Minnesota Vikings. In my opinion, that doesn't mean that Denver's, seriously considering moving on from any of those guys because they have interest in other guys. You have to ask yourself, can you surround Russell Wilson with yet another weapon, right? Because of the fact that, and I think when you factor in injury history, for the last 3 years, the Broncos have had a major injury to one of their key wide receivers every single year. It doesn't hurt to add another guy to that room in the event something like that were to happen. Because you can't tell me, looking back at last year, with KJ going down with injury, Tim Patrick going down with an injury, you couldn't tell me that Denver would have benefited from having another wide receiver there with Courtland and Jerry?
Yeah. No, and I think that's a fair point. But where I kind of, try to read between the lines here is when you see the Broncos, which have now been confirmed reports, that Adam Thielen, player of interest. Allen Lazard, player of interest. What that tells me is clearly Sean Payton and company are not content with the wide receiver room as is. I like Tim Patrick a lot.
You should always be content either. I think if
you always want to look for upgrades.
You should always look to either have upgrades or you should know, like, okay, hey, this guy is going to make us better. It's like knowing that.
But the thing with Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy in particular is the what-if narrative. You don't have those proven commodities. Tim Patrick's a little bit more proven. But when you look at the numbers, and I understand the Broncos as a team last year were dysfunctional as could be, but you're looking at a guy in Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton that combined for 8 touchdown passes last year. Now,
Jerry had 6 of them.
Yeah, exactly. Now, is that a fault to Nathaniel Hackett, his play calling? Is that a fault to Russell Wilson? Is that a fault to organizational dysfunction? It's probably all the above. Exactly. But where I'm sitting here is, if you're the Denver Broncos, if you're Sean Payton, if you're looking to get the most out of Russell Wilson, you need to set him up with proven commodities, guys that have been there and done that.
So who is that at this point, outside of OBJ?
I think OBJ is an interesting name. I think an Adam Thielen would have checked that box. Allen Lazard, maybe. Right? But what I'm sitting here is, with guys like Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton, especially Sutton in particular, when you gave him that contract, you were banking on him overachieving the level of play in which you were paying him for. It was a very 50-50. Denver did not need to extend Courtland Sutton, but they wanted to bank on his ability. He hasn't lived up to the hype right now.
And the whole thing is like the contract extension was, and I can tell you this, some of the conversations that were had behind closed doors, we're going to get you a quarterback.
Right.
Denver went out and they got Russell Wilson, and it was a disaster.
And again,
so it's like it's not entirely on the receiving core. It's not entirely on Russell Wilson. It's not like there's mutual blame to go around with an actual, and I want to say this, like, no disrespect to Nathaniel Hackett, but with Sean Payton coming in, I want to see what the Broncos offense does with an actual adult in the room. Someone who's proven, someone who's done it, someone who has come to a franchise and has rebuilt it from the ground up into a team that competes in the playoffs, winning division titles, won a Super Bowl. In my opinion, that's what you get with Sean Payton. This is why I've always said, like, look, if you were the Denver Broncos, and if you are looking at trading away Jerry Jeudy or Courtland Sutton, why not wait to see what happens leading up to the trade deadline? Why not have a chance to maximize their value if you are going to offset them?
Because in Courtland Sutton's scenario, it's not apples to apples with Sutton and Jeudy, but in Courtland Sutton's scenario, he's a little bit older than Jeudy. He's also expressed a little bit of displeasure with the organization, kind of the cryptic tweets, whatever it might be.
I think he's frustrated more so at the fact that, you're hearing all these things about him being potentially traded, but Courtland's not hearing it from anybody but the media.
But that's also the game.
Frustrating.
Right. I mean, how many times do we hear about players that they find out they've been traded or released on Twitter?
Yeah, dude, it's crazy, but it highlights a bigger problem in the NFL, right? And it goes back to my ultimate point. Teams expect players to be loyal to the team, but at any moment, the team can be disloyal to a player, right? It's like, what can you do for me? And that's really kind of how backwards things have been. I am still on the premise, and I put it out on Mile High Sports. I'm eager for Danny's thoughts on this. I truly believe you should see what you have with Courtland, Jerry, everybody else with Russell Wilson in Sean Payton's offense, at least for the first part of the season leading up to the trade deadline. If you feel like, okay, hey, we know we're going to be okay with this guy, we can move this guy and get capital, yeah. Denver's fine this year without a first or second round pick. They've got a decent enough roster, I think, to negate that hit of not having that. You have 2 premier third-round picks. You have your first-round pick next year. Maybe you work to get an additional first next year. Maybe you work to get an additional second. However, the message here, and this has been something that even Draymond Jones mentioned as he left, you trade away your best players. You need your best players in order to win games. Trading them is not always going to do it. Like draft picks are great, right? But draft picks are 50-50 risk-reward.
Yeah.
They're never proven to work out. So it's like, you want to keep your best players and prove that, like, hey, this is a place where, we know we can come here. And I'll say, like, when George Payton came on and when Shelby Harris and Justin Simmons got extended, guys in that locker room started thinking, okay, they value us. We play, we perform. They value us. They're going to take care of us. But we've seen Denver has traded away some of their best players.
But have they not traded away their best players with the best interest of the franchise in mind? That's the thing. Is you trade away Bradley Chubb, you use that pick to get Sean Payton.
Oh, here's my thing.
I don't think that George Payton has made a move that has hindered the long-term.
Like with Von Miller. Let's think about it this way. They did right by Von. They sent them to a team that was going to compete in the playoffs and have a chance to win the Super Bowl. Luckily, they did. But also, some of these players want to play in Denver. Some of these players, despite how bad, like when Denver's been at their worst, you have some of the best players that still want to be around there, to turn it around, to be there. To me, that says something about it, right? And it's like players, I can tell you this. Players inside the locker room, they're taking note. Now, a lot of people want to come play for Sean Payton, which is exciting to see. We've heard that from all the people that Denver has signed. But it's like players are also keeping note. Oh, well, they say that I'm a core player, but yet they're trading away core players. They're getting rid of core players. Teams are starting to take, players are starting to look at like how teams are going. That's why the NFLPA did this whole report card thing. It's going to change the way teams approach free agency, I think, going forward.
I think it's interesting. And to kind of wrap up my perspective on it, I can see the upside to retaining a Jerry Jeudy and a Courtland Sutton. But I look at this wide receiver room as a whole, even with Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler, as a bit incomplete. I look at it as a what-if wide receiver room. I think that the Denver Broncos, they could have a great wide receiver room, but they don't have a proven commodity that they could rely on, a staple. And what the Broncos need this year
should be Jerry Jeudy.
It should be.
They should feature him.
But it hasn't been. And I think you need a veteran. I think you need somebody who's been there and done that. I think Odell would be a great fit because this is a big season, not just for the Broncos, but for Russell Wilson in particular, Sean Payton in particular. And maybe that this season becomes a year of evaluation if it doesn't get off to a great start. But at the end of the day, on paper, I'm looking at this wide receiver room, and I'm saying it's good, not great.
I think Jerry
I don't even
Jeudy
know
has
if it's that good.
Everything in his arsenal to be great, and I think we see that this year.
But you need to see it. You haven't seen it consistently.
I don't think it's been his fault either, to be honest with you.
And I think that's fair.
Like, because when Denver has actually looked his way, good things have happened. They've moved the ball. He's put up numbers. He's sustained drives. Unfortunately, Denver last year was such a mess, AP. It's so hard to really gauge where things are at because of how bad things were. Like, I've never seen in my life, I never thought that the Broncos offense would be worse than it was under Pat Shurmur. And golly, it was by a landslide. That's how disappointing last year was. But I'm telling you, like, I think a lot of people are confusing how last year went with how good Jerry Jeudy is. And Jerry Jeudy is their best player on offense by far. And it's not even
I don't
close.
disagree. I
Even
hope
Tim Patrick liked my tweet saying, hey, it's a terrible idea to trade Jerry Jeudy.
if the Broncos roll the dice on this wide receiver room and it pays off, good for them.
You got to make sure that, hey, if you're going to roll the dice, you're going to take that risk. It has to pay off or you're going to face scrutiny.
Yeah.
People also need to realize Denver can sign OBJ if they wanted to and still have Jerry Jeudy on the roster.
And I think that would be fun. So we'll see how the Denver Broncos wide receiver room shakes out. I think that there's some room for improvement. Cody seems to believe that the wide receiver room is strong as is. We'll see how it plays out. Before we hit a break, you got any thoughts on this conversation, Mr. Bailey? What are your thoughts on the Broncos wide receiver room?
Cody mentioned it towards the end. It's just not on them.
Mm-hmm.
It's been one of the worst offensive lines in the league, and we saw plenty of opportunities last year for Russell Wilson to throw the ball to wide open receivers. He chose not to throw a ball to open receivers. So I don't think it's on the receivers. I think it's more about Russell Wilson, how he was being used in Nathaniel Hackett's offense last year versus what Sean Payton can get from him this year, and then the protection. So I think they've addressed all three of those things already, and you don't even have to address that receiver room itself.
Yeah.
It would be foolish to trade him away. It kind of reminds me of what I said about the Nuggets. Like, give these guys a chance to do it together, maybe for more than one season. And we haven't even seen this group together for one season.
Yeah.
I would like to see them.
I want to see what they can do in Payton's offense.
Here's the thing. If they can get a first-round pick for one of these guys, I mean, they're not going to get a first for Courtland, but I would like to see them keep their guys and add to it, whether it's an OBJ or a Landry. I'd like to.
You have a great offensive-minded coach who has built really good teams.
And where I have concern is you don't have anyone who's kind of that backbone. Like, you don't have anyone you could fall back on right now. You hope that can be Jeudy. You hope that could be Sutton. We've seen Tim Patrick doing it, but he's coming off an injury. You just don't have that cog, right? Yeah. And I would like to see them sign somebody or bring somebody in or maybe even facilitate a trade for somebody that maybe has that experience with the Sean Payton offense and can lead by example of how to run this system to a T. We'll